Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, who, if you are not listening to what he's doing over on the Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, you should be. And everybody, this is my fault, Omari. I will take the blame for being 7 minutes late here with the start. I know nobody's going to believe traffic because I live in Southwest Kansas where there's no such thing as traffic. Although during harvest, there can be. You get stuck behind a combine.
I'll just say no car traffic, but there's probably other types of traffic.
Yes. I was traveling home from somewhere this morning. I got in. I wanted to at least say hello to the family, get settled in just a little bit before we started here. So that's my bad. I wanted to just give my kids a kiss on the forehead before we got going. And yes,
you hear that, guys? Bryce shows his kids over the pod.
How dare I? I will not choose my kids over my lawn, but I will choose my kids over the podcast.
You got to put your foot down somewhere. I get it.
Priorities, we all have them. There's a rank. This is life. I'm fully expecting a trade or signing because you guys are going live. I hope so.
I am too, actually. I was like, it's going to be something unlucky. I'm just waiting for it.
Yeah, if there is... Listen, if something happens, we need it to happen now. We need it to happen today. Wes has his notifications on. We'll see it. We're ready to go. Yes, YouTube user says Bryce holding himself accountable. If nothing else, guys, I will hold my own receipts here and tell you whenever I was wrong. I am fully capable and willing to do that. So, Omari, this has been a lot for you. This is the time of year you got to write, you got to keep track of things, all of that. How have the last 48 hours or so been for you? I know the Pistons haven't done a lot, but since we recorded, they've got a new head coach, they've made a trade, they've made a signing.
Yeah, it's not even the last 48 hours. It's been the last 2 weeks. I tweeted it the other day, but it hasn't even been 2 full weeks since they fired Marty. That was 2 Wednesdays ago. Today's we're recording on Tuesday. So it's just an insane amount of off-season stuff crammed into the last 2 weeks. And it's just been kind of funny to track Twitter and just see how quickly the discussion has evolved. People are not even talking about JB Bickerstaff, which we will because of the free agency signings and the Cade extension. It's just news being stacked on top of other news, and some of that stuff kind of gets lost in the shuffle. This time of year is fun, man. I think it's fun to, finally see stuff happen. And, especially for this team, just see exactly what route they're going to take going into next season. So busy, obviously, but, that's how it is this time of year. It's fun. So.
Victor says, we live, baby, watching at work. Haha, don't judge. Yes, we love you. If you're watching at work, we appreciate you. Will J says, if the team can do it, you guys can as well. Love it. Listen, we will answer some questions probably when we get to the end of the episode. Obviously, we have JB to talk about. We have THJ to talk about. We have Tobias Harris to talk about, all of those things. Oh, yeah, Derek Brown here as well. Look forward to this podcast every week. Thank you guys so much. If you're watching live right now, hit the like button. Help us grow and expand and continue to do that. All of that. If you're listening on podcast, rate, review, subscribe, whatever you need to do to catch it. Great coverage, Omari and Bryce. Appreciate you guys always so much. We love you guys. And obviously, we wouldn't have a podcast if you guys didn't listen. So you guys make this show, along with Wes, me, and Omari, are just along for the ride. Let's start with JB Bickerstaff. I immediately got mixed reactions. I know the people, bigs up Bryce and Omari from Richard Brooks. Thank you, Richard, from Twitter over there. I had mixed reactions from people. I had mixed reactions myself. Omari, what were kind of your thoughts? What led to this? Give us that side of things, then we'll dive into some of the other things.
Yeah, I honestly wasn't sure exactly what to expect, whether they would go with a brand new coach or, I think JB and Borrego were the two coaches who had experience coming in, and Borrego put his name out a couple of days before. So my first thought really was just I kind of laughed because when I first started covering the NBA, that was almost 6 years ago, and I was down in Memphis. I started 5 games until the 2018-19 season, and JB was the head coach. So it's just a lot of coaches they could have hired. They hired a coach that I'd already covered, which I just thought was funny because that just doesn't happen very often. But beyond that, to me, it's just, I think that there is, some maybe upside to them getting an experienced coach in who has sort of been through the chaos of the NBA and just kind of understands how to manage that stuff. JB really takes the defensive side seriously. And he's also, I think, a really good motivator. I think he's really good with young guys. He's still a younger coach himself. And I think his energy will fit the franchise pretty well, especially when you have so many guys who are still on their rookie deals, right? There's a lot of pivotal decisions coming up, and you need to sort of maximize these guys to the extent that you can before it's time to pay them, and you have to make those types of calls. So probably not a hire that like is going to get people super excited. Like if you hire somebody who's never been a coach, now you can speculate, right? With JB, there's not much speculation because he was just coaching the Cavs like 2 months ago. But I think with that, like there comes some certainty as far as what you're getting. And just with the timeline the Pistons have been on, I'm sure that probably factored into it on some level as well. But I think he's a good coach for a young team. Just seeing what he did in Memphis and seeing what he did in Cleveland, that's been a pretty consistent theme throughout.
Jalen Bell says, where the heck y'all been, fellas? Too much is going on. Don't ever leave us so long. LOL. Yeah, we appreciate it. Here's the thing. It's good for you guys to want us and be begging for us to do more, as opposed to the opposite of people saying, hey, you guys record for too much, for too long, and you want to hear less of us. So we'll always leave you wanting a little bit more. Listen, my thing with the first thing with JB Omari, we'll kind of go through these one at a time of things that I came up with. I've said, Omari, that I learned a lesson 12 months ago that I don't know anything about these coaching hires. It's just so hard to truly judge them. There's so much that goes on behind the scenes that has to do with roster construction. Here's the other thing. Coaches can learn and grow and evolve. Some don't, but some can. One of the first things was the two big lineups. It was something he did in Memphis. It was something that he obviously did in Cleveland. My expectation is, and thoughts on that, is that was more of a roster construction type of thing. What is your vibe on that? You covered that, as you mentioned, a little bit in Memphis. Do you think we'll see the two bigs? Do you kind of in line with me where, now maybe that was just more in Cleveland? You have Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. What are you going to do? Not play those two guys together?
Yeah, to me, that's more so front office decisions to build those types of rosters. So just some context, when I first got down to Memphis, and it just kind of shows how quickly things changed in the NBA. But that was the last year that Mike Conley, Marc Gasol played for him. So you still have Mark at center. They had just drafted Jaren. He was the starting power forward. So it's just sort of just the way that roster came together. Like, those are your two bigs. Both of those guys could shoot. So it was a two big lineup. But for all intents and purposes, Marc Gasol can shoot, Jaren can shoot. So it's not quite the same as an Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, or like a Marvin Bagley and Duran, or, whatever we've seen here in Detroit. It's a little bit different. Some numbers from that year. The Grizzlies, I believe, finished 9th in overall defensive rating that year. Yeah, they did. And that was with a lot of roster change. Like, it was like last season roster change for the Grizzlies that year. Like, I can't name every single player who played for that team. Like, they had Tyler Dorsey, they had Marshawn Brooks, they had Ivan Rabb, Shelvin Mack, like just so many random guys. Like, I could just go on. But for that defensive rating to stick all the way through the season, especially after they traded Marc Gasol at that deadline that brought in Jonas Valanciunas, I think speaks to what he can bring on that end of the floor at the very least. But I also agree with Bryce to the extent that it's really hard to say what coaches would do when they come in, because not only are you dealing with different front office and a different roster, you also have different assistants. But assistants do typically play pretty big roles when it comes to player development and X's and O's on offense and defense. So it's kind of hard to, in some cases, sort of carry everything one over from one stop to the next. But I don't like, if he plays two bigs here in Detroit, it'll be because the roster lends itself to it, I think, and not because he just naturally likes playing two bigs together.
Yeah, so I asked somebody about this, and I want to then transition this into another thing. I felt like, I'm not going to say who I talked to. I talked to some people that cover the Cleveland Cavs. I'm only not going to say their names because I didn't ask them if I could when I was asking about it. But I asked about the two bigs and slower pace. And somebody said roster construction for sure. The Cavs didn't have a starting caliber big who could reliably space the floor. And so then you're obviously going to play a little bit slower. And they're both starting caliber bigs. He didn't really have a choice, because I think a couple things that stood out to me as I looked at the numbers, Omari, and I want to come back to the defense, was the pace of play and the three-point attempt rate. Now, if you just look at three-point attempts, it's much lower because the pace is so slow. If you look at three-point attempt rate, it is a little bit better. And then this last year in Cleveland, it actually got a whole lot better, and that may have had to do with the personnel he had, but that was just a little bit of what I saw. So what do you think about, let's just say JB is a little bit slower paced. Do you see that as a concern for this roster that has a Jay Nivey, a Nassar Thompson, a Ron Holland, a Jalen Duren, and a roster that, we'll touch on this a little bit later, has a little bit better floor spacing, but still isn't great? Do you see a slower pace as something that works, or are you hoping that JB, either that was a product of those rosters or something he can kind of transition his mindset into this younger roster?
Yeah, slower paces have been pretty common with JB teams. I think it probably fits Cade, just given that he operates at the half court probably a little bit more in the transition. But I think a lot of that, too, also just comes down to how much the other ball handlers develop. Like, obviously, Ivy could push the ball in transition. Like, we have these athletes, Asar, you mentioned Rod Holland, JD. All these guys can get up and down the floor. Just looking at the roster, it seems like this might be one of the more athletic teams he's had, to be honest. Like, just not too many teams have wings like Asar and Ron Holland that are just absolute high flyers. And then you have Ivy, who's probably top 6, 7 fastest dudes in the NBA. So those are, tools he hasn't really had. Like, Mike Conley is not a slow basketball player, but that Grizzlies team was far more slow pace, grind it out, grit and grind, this and that. Like, that's what their identity was. And then Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, obviously, if you're starting those two guys, you're probably not going to have as many opportunities to just truly run. So I'm curious about that. Like, I think it probably fits the way Cade likes to attack the game, but there's room for flexibility in there too, just because you have, some athletic guys that you haven't had at past stops. So I'm curious to see that, because this is a team that's built to get out of transition a bit more, I think, than those past teams he coached.
Yeah, so another person I asked about said, we definitely felt like we played quicker in the January stretch, despite the pace stats not really reflecting it. Ball definitely didn't stick. Here's to your point, Omari. Ultimately, it's never felt like we have much in the way of run out guys outside of a core. Shady Osman, it didn't seem like they had those same type of athletes in Cleveland to get out and transition. So I want to go back to a couple other things, because listen, there's concerns here, right? Like, even these people I talked about the offensive creativity and those type of things. This hire for me would, again, based on how much we can actually judge it and analyze it, which I don't think is a lot anyway, if they brought in an assistant coach that was like, that's an offensive minded guy, he's going to be the guy that creates the sets and what they do on the offensive end, not just a Fred Vincent shooting coach type of guy. And also, guys, we are starring your question. So I know people are talking about Wendell Carter Jr. and some other things. We have Wes is starring those. So we will try to get to those later in the episode. So that would be, but one thing that came up was great at establishing a team first culture and good defensive scheme, and definitely a guy who takes accountability. Those are things that seem good to me, Omari. And just looking at the raw stats, it looked like at both stops, his defense got better, the turnovers went down. And those are two things we've talked about this team being really, really bad at, that improvement would at least help raise the floor.
No doubt. I think he's a floor raiser. I think he's a guy that can really set a culture. He's going to, there will be press conferences where he defends his players to the death, right? Like, he's going to have his guys' back no matter what. His guys are going to know that they can trust him, and that, he's going to hold them, right? Like, they're on the same team, same side. I don't want to say rah guy, because I think that has like a negative connotation.
Sure.
But he is that type of culture builder, right? Like, he's going to go in the locker room and give you a rousing speech. And he's going to carry that energy into everything he does. You're going to see him bark at the refs, all game. Like, that passion, I think, is going to be there nonstop, which for a team this young, I think you probably need a little bit more energy. You talk about sort of the fit issues last season. And, I think some of that was just the disposition, right? Like, when you're a young team, you're getting battered every single night. Sometimes you need somebody to get in your ear, like sometimes that's all you need. I do think JB is that type of coach. So I'm curious to see how this team responds to, I think, a different coaching style. JB's probably a bit more closer to Dwayne than Monty, but he's also younger than those guys. JB's actually the youngest coach I think the Pistons have had in a while. I'd have to go back and look, but it'll have a different energy in the locker room for sure. Yeah, he's 45.
Yeah, so as Pistons Talk says, he's 45 years old. Again, one final thing here that I got a comment from somebody. A huge concern over the last few years has been his rotation. So that goes back to something we saw with Dwayne Casey. It's something we had concerns with Monty Williams. So again, I'm just trying to give both sides of things, to be honest with you guys, because I don't know. None of us know really what we're getting here. But they said, that said, I think he's a perfect fit for a team trying to establish a culture and identity, which you just spoke to. Solid coach, and rooting for him. One final thing I kind of want to bring up. A big pushback I got from people was, well, they let go of him as soon as the team was ready to get over the hump. He couldn't win in the playoffs. He couldn't get him to the next step. That's the least of my worries. Now, I don't know if he's going to be good or not. This may be rinse, cycle, repeat, as some have said. But my thing is, I don't care if he can win in the playoffs. I want to see a coach take this team from where they're at to that even being a concern. And if he does that, then he was worth the hire. If he takes this team from 14 wins to 25 wins to 34 wins to 42 wins to 42 wins, and then you have to make a decision like, man, he did a great job getting us from 14 to 42, but he's not going to get us from 42 to 55 and get deep into the playoffs. Like, I'm okay with that. That's a win. That's a great hire. And then you let him go and you go find the guy that does get you over the top, like those teams have, with like the Memphis tried to do with Taylor Jenkins, and now Cleveland is trying to do. I just don't think that's the concern I'm worried about at all. I understand anything else. That one doesn't really bother me at all.
Yeah, like, and we'll talk about Tobias too, but a lot of the criticism of Tobias was like he disappeared in the playoffs. I'm like, the Pistons have disappeared for the playoffs for 16 years. Like, they just need guys who can shoot, you know? Yeah. Like you got to get to step one before you get to step two, and step two before you get to step three. And I think that's what next season is really going to be, is Trajan Langdon coming in brand new, you know, still getting to know these guys, you know, and then figuring out what step are we, right? Clearly, we're some form of step one because we just had a 14-win season, but to what extent can you accelerate that? And to me, that's what a lot of this is going into next season. And even during next season, is just taking stock of what these guys can do, what their upside is, and then starting to really build a team that could fit Cade and really lock in on that aspect of it, especially since I mean, I know people were worried about the wording of the tweet, but they're going to offer him a max deal. I'd be shocked if he didn't sign it. But that's where they are now, pretty much.
Yeah, so the last thing I'll ask here then, Omari, is just, did you think a new head coach, because I think that's what a lot of people wanted. A lot of people's issue with the NBA is recycled head coaches over and over and over. Do you think the organization looked into a current assistant? You know, there's excitement around JJ Redick because we don't know. You know, he's a podcaster, former player turned head coach who doesn't have the experience. To me, that's just as much of a risk as recycling JB Bickerstaff, but we've seen JB Bickerstaff actually do what this team needs him to do. So I don't know that it's as big a risk, but I think that was a lot of people. They would rather just see a name that was a little more exciting. Can you understand that? Do you see that? Do you think, was it really Borrego and Bickerstaff? Do you think there was a look at any of those other type of guys?
I think Sean Sweeney got pretty deep into the process too, but I think one thing about sports psychology in general, and I don't say this negatively at all, I just think, you know, like, it's something I see a lot. Like, people will always value the unknown over like something that's a little bit more certain, right? You know, like, you ever take a swing or something that could be like, basically you would take a 1% chance at $1,000 over a 50% chance at 500, basically, you know, even though the odds say like a milder swing probably works. Like, you look at Tom Thibodeau in New York, that's been a great fit. There's been plenty of first-time head coaches that have not panned out. Like, people talk about Taylor Jenkins and the guys who have found success immediately, and it does happen. But there are also a lot of first-time head coaches who wash out and then they just become an assistant and you don't hear about them again, right? So it's always a mixed bag with that. But I think as a GM, ultimately, you got to go with who you feel the most confidence in. And at the end of the day, that was JB. And as we said, I mean, you know, coaches rotate in and out. This is their third head coach in 3 years. So you can never really predict the future. But I think for this team right now, the hire does make sense.
Yeah, my thing is, like, I'm cool with it. I would love to. I think the defense is going to get better. I have some concerns about the offense and the pace and the 3-point rate. And I would love to see the next assistant hire or a assistant hire be like, this is a young offensive minded assistant coach. This will allow JB to just focus on the defense, and this assistant can kind of do the offensive things. Again, we just don't know, because we don't know how these guys handle locker rooms, young players, all of those things. Hopefully it'll work out. One final thing, I'm just going to give a comment on the Cade contract. I don't think Detroit should have any issues putting the escalator language in there, because it's a win-win to me. If Cade hits the escalators, that means he's becoming the player you need him to be, and then you're completely comfortable paying him what those escalators would mean. So that's just my thoughts, my opinions. Omari, if you don't have any thoughts on that or anything to add, we can go to break here. And when we come back, we will go ahead and dive into Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris.
All right, we are back with segment 2. Only thing I have to say about Cade is that the cap's going to go up so much that, like, whatever your framework for a good or bad deal is this summer is going to look completely different in 2 years. So I'll leave it at that. But let's talk about Tobias Harris. I know that's probably the signing that people have paid the most attention to, and we'll talk about THJ as well. Bryce, I'm just going to pitch it to you this way. On a scale from 1 to 10, how good do you think that Tobias Harris signing is? Because I'm at like people think it's a bad signing. To me, it's just like a very solid 7.5 out of 10. Like he fills an immediate role. You know what you're getting. Like, where are you at as far as that?
So I will be honest. When it first came out, I was much lower than that.
Okay.
I also didn't like that there was no team option on year 2. I still don't like that there's no team option on year 2. I know people will say it's a tradable contract, all of that stuff. I get it. And maybe at the end of the day, that $26 million comes real in handy to take a swing on for salary matching purposes. As I did my little article, quote unquote, or post is probably a better term for it because it's not an actually article. I warmed up to it a little bit, even with not having the second year team option. I would say I'm a little closer to a 5, which to me is just kind of, this is fine. It makes sense. To the point made earlier, this is a guy who, even before this last year playoffs, which it doesn't matter, but his 3 playoff runs before, 18.1 points per game on 50-38 shooting splits, 37 minutes per game. So he was awful in these playoffs, but the 3 before that, he was really good. His last 5 seasons, the numbers are almost identical to what he did this past season, which is just under 17 to 18 points, 6.5 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, half a block, doesn't turn it over much, plays over 30 minutes a night, 49% from the field, 35 to 37% from 3, great free throw percentage, just under 60% true shooting. This is a guy that he's actually a decent player, right? He's a good regular season player. I don't know what you get defensively. And the other thing is, he plays the position this team does not have. Who is the real 4-man on this team? Asar, you could say is a 4, but he can't shoot at all right now. So I've said this. If there's no real big swing out there, anything like that, if Tobias is plan B or plan C, I'm cool with it. I just really wanted a 1+1. I'm not I don't need to be over the top about it. That was just my preference. But I'm fine with this. It's a 5. I'm fine with this.
Yeah, and West Point Saudi also plays over 70 games a year.
Yes.
Which, for a Pistons team that's always banged up. And I think that factors into it too. It's a 2-year deal, 2 years, 52. It becomes an expiring after a year. You're hedging that, he's, on the wrong side of 30. So, you're hoping that he could play up to that level for, most of that deal. But it's a fine signing. It's a player who has an established track record for scoring the ball, solid defensively. It's a 2-year commitment, and he feels a huge need. That's kind of how I see it. 7 out of 10 signing, it fits what the Pistons need. It's not going to transform the organization, but if you're just looking at it in terms of let's get viable players on the floor, Tobias Harris is a viable player.
Yeah, the way this goes bad is he does turn 32 in 2 weeks. And so it's one of those things, if somehow, and again, the numbers don't project for him to take a fall. The last 5 years, essentially, like I said, look exactly the same as what he did last year in the regular season. Now, if you want to go off the playoffs, obviously there was a huge fall with that. But if he can continue to do what he has done the last 5 seasons, I think you take that as a Pistons fan and feel pretty good about it. I think the national media's big qualm with this is the money. I don't think it's the idea of actually adding Tobias Harris. I think it's the idea of why did you have to pay him $26 million a year to add him when, is he going to Orlando? Keith Smith had an awesome tweet this morning about what was available yet. So Detroit has the cap room. Orlando has cap room. Philly has a little bit of cap room, and Utah has a ton. So, you'd really be against, those are the teams you're vying against, and Philly wasn't even in play there. So I think I wonder what their reaction would be if this was a 2 for 40. If this was 2 for 40, I think people would feel completely different about it. And I guess the argument against that is, what's $6 million this offseason for the Detroit Pistons, who we don't even know what they're going to do with the $26.5 million they have left right now.
Yeah, I think the way national media probably sees the deal is like this team was a dumpster fire last year, and your swing in free agency is Tobias Harris, and it's like, how does that fix anything? Yeah, it's like it's like you can only patch the boat, like you can't you can't fix the boat. You're patching those and figuring out what longer term repairs you need, right? Like 2 years. I mean, I think you make a good point. Like $6 billion in a grand scheme per year, it's not going to make or break any of Detroit's plans. And they have money to blow, too. And I'll also add that coming into this summer, Detroit's only contract that extends beyond next season that cracked $15 million was Isaiah Stewart. And that's at $15 million, right? You look at, just what types of contracts do you need? Yeah, as my dad is bringing up, what types of contracts do you need to be able to, maneuver at the deadline to get other guys in? It's going to help to have the $16 million a year Tim Hardaway at this upcoming deadline. It's going to help to have Tobias his $26 million next deadline, if at that point it's just a salary dump. Well, if he can still play, then of course, maybe just keep him and write the season out. But I think if you look at it from an asset standpoint, it actually helps to have those bigger contracts sometimes, as long as it's not like a crazy overpay. If it's like $35 billion, that's one thing. But between 20 and 26, like that's not that huge a deal in the grand scheme.
Yeah, because if you look at it, if this team makes a big move for a star, if they trade for a star, it's probably going to be the young guys that are attached to it as well. Like they'll be the real assets in that move. And you look at Asar, J.I., Jalen Duren, Marcus Sasser. Asar makes the most of those guys at 8.8. Jaden, well, I'm looking at a year from now. So just right this upcoming year, 8.4, 8, 4.5, 2.8. If it's Ron Holland, same thing. Like those guys just don't make enough money to really hit those numbers. And so I think that's important to make note of with this. I know just like signing a guy to this contract just to be a tradable number doesn't really sound, sexy or whatever, but it is important to have those contracts. I've talked about these with other NBA teams. It's like, who do you add to the trade to hit the numbers that you need unless it's somebody that is important to your roster that you really need to keep. Somebody, I can't find the comment now, but said, is Tobias actually solid defensively? I don't know that he's solid. I think he's fine defensively. So if I said solid, maybe I misspoke there. He's definitely not a plus defender. I think at his size, and as I read back through my notes, I did think he made some impactful plays for Philadelphia. So I just said fine. I don't think he's going to be the negative that Bojan was. Maybe I'll be wrong there as these guys continue to age. Obviously, the defense goes down. Maybe he does end up negatively. But yeah, like this wasn't a signing at all that makes me feel like this helped their defense in some way. But I mean, compared
definitely
to
way more upside on offense than defense. Yes. I think I said he was solid defensively. He's fine defensively. He's not going to come in and be a game changer defensively, but I don't think he's going to be the worst of the team by far either.
Yeah, that's my thing there. Is he's not just going to terrorize. He's not going to make this defense any worse than it already is. Yeah. Is it going to make it better? Absolutely not. No way. I think in some ways it could make things make more sense just because he's an actual four-man, which this team does not have. And maybe he can take some matchups just with his size. But yeah, nobody's here implying that he's a good defender or anything like that. I think it's fine. It's whatever. You're bringing in Tobias Harris to knock down shots, offensively provide some value to your team.
No doubt.
As somebody said, Detroit for life 1000, Bojan was getting hunted. Tobias shouldn't be that bad. And I would agree with that. Like that's a good way of saying, I don't think you're going to hunt Tobias Harris and him just get torched over and over and over.
No doubt. Let's talk about Tim Hardaway Jr.
Yeah, let's do it.
Overall, how did you feel about that one? I think he's a guy that, well, for one, he's a guy that could really, really heat up. Like his 3-point percentage, I think is around 36, 37 for his career, like which is fine. But just a guy who can really heat up in a hurry. Also feels the need for this team. Not that great defensively. Like I see him, I don't know if he starts next season. I see him as a rotation wing. Sort of, what's your scout on Tim Hardaway and how he fits into this team next season?
Yeah, I mean, I think like this guy's not going to help your defense. I think he may actually make it worse. But, there's not even the size stuff that you could pitch with him that maybe you could with Tobias Harris. I think the exciting thing about Tim Hardaway Jr. is just the sheer volume of three-pointers, right? You may not look at Tim Hardaway Jr.'s percentage over the last 5 seasons and go, 38% is nothing to scoff at, but already 3 no doubts.
Yeah,
listen,
there we go.
We all have our things. Omari says no doubt. I say at the end of the day, and I also say Omari's name a lot. Somebody tweeted at me the other day that anytime I'm podcasting, I say the other person's name. So I'll be like, the thing is, Omari, I don't know why I do it. It's just what I do. But
it cracks me up because I don't even realize I do it. Like whenever I see the no doubt counter, I'm like, wow, I do say it a lot. Huh? Yeah.
we need an official. Wes, can we get that? Can we get a no doubt? Oh, Amari's ankle. I love it. Wes, can we get a no doubt, counter up here and then a counter over here of how many times I say Amari's name?
We should have like a bell and like a gong every time it happens.
That we wouldn't be able to talk because we say that stuff so much. We wouldn't be able to say any of that stuff. 38% over the last 5 seasons on 7.5 attempts. That volume is something that helps you. So here's my thoughts on this trade overall, Omari. There, I just did it. I like the idea of Tim Hardaway Jr. on the roster. I like that. I think this is something that provides value to this team. We just talked about they drafted Ron Holland, and what did everybody say? They need floor spacing. This team added some floor spacing with these 2 moves. I still haven't warmed up to we need t-shirts. Yes, we do. I still haven't warmed up to the overall process of all of this. And I know it was across 2 GMs, but it's Boyan and Burks. You bring in Grimes. Grimes was supposed to be the asset in that trade. I love the idea of Grimes as this 3-and-D guard/wing. And then now you're selling on him before you ever really got a chance. That's where my hang up is that I think Grimes makes so much sense overall. And I just wonder what made them feel like, hey, there's no future for him here. That would be the one question I would love to have an answer to.
Yeah, and I think that's the key question. Like people understand who Tim Hardaway Jr. is as a player. Like, I mean, he went to Michigan. A lot of people here have been watching him for, 12, 13, 14 years. So he's a known commodity here for sure. I think it's the value, right? So you have 3 second-round picks and Grimes. And Grimes has been a good rotation player for New York. He shot the ball well, and he could really defend. And the issue in Detroit was just that he wasn't healthy. He had knee soreness. He played 6 games, and he wasn't good in those 6 games because he was clearly hurt. So, to the extent that factored into the decision, I think it's tough to say. But that's one of those trades where, on the surface, maybe the value wasn't the best. I think with second-round picks, it depends on what you do with them, right?
Yep.
Sometimes you can find a player. I think that Toronto second-round pick could be good, but sometimes you can use them to acquire, like, actual good players. They got Fontecchio essentially for a second-round pick. So, like, I agree with that. Like, on his face, like, when Reggie Jackson, like, was a $5 billion salary dump, and they got 3 picks for him. Granted, they're Denver's picks, so they're probably in the back half of the second round instead of Toronto, who's going to be probably top 10 next season. Is that enough value to make up for passing up on Quentin Grimes, who I think is 24 years old, can defend, can shoot, and fits with this team long term? Because everything with Quentin is that they were going to have to make a commitment to him within the next year.
Yep.
Which I'm sure also factored into it to an extent, whereas Tim Hardaway Jr. obviously is on the last year of his deal. So there's probably a lot more certainty you're getting with THJ, not just from an on-court standpoint, but from an asset standpoint as well. But yeah, I think a lot of the issue with THJ wasn't him as a player, but certainly the value of the pick. And if Grimes goes down to Dallas and becomes a rotation guy, people are going to be like, why did we do that? Right. So, I mean, I think that's fair. I think that's fair to be skeptical about.
No, and here's the thing. Everybody's saying in the comments is absolutely true. If Grimes isn't healthy, that makes it, if everybody else is comfortable saying Quentin Grimes didn't want to be here, I'm cool with that. I don't know that for a fact, so I'm not comfortable saying that. But obviously that's part of the equation. If there was real concerns about the injuries, if there's real concerns that what we saw in year 2 in New York is something he's never going to get back to, and if he didn't want to be in Detroit or they weren't going to ever pay him what he would want or, whatever, then 100%, then this is a really nice move to get in somebody like Tim Hardaway Jr. that's going to do the things that this team needs. This is another one, as we mentioned. Also, somebody said that I am never satisfied. Like, usually I'm the total optimist here. Like, I'm known for being too positive about everything. So this is kind of the opposite side of that. He was not good in the play. This is what's interesting about both of these guys. Both of these guys were not good in the playoffs. And I wonder if some of that is keeping people from valuing what they did a little bit, because THJ was not good. But again, his previous 3 playoff runs, 16 points a game on 39-35 shooting splits and 35 minutes per game. So even in, it was just these last 2 playoffs for these 2 guys, Tim Hardaway Jr., he probably would have been my vote for 6th man of the year at the turn of the calendar year last year. His first 3-4 months, he was awesome. Somebody said it earlier. In the regular season, you know who the Mavs' 3rd leading scorer was? Tim Hardaway
Yeah.
Jr.
Yeah,
Tim
there you
Hardaway Jr. was the third leading scorer on that team. And I think I had asked you, it may have been Koo when I recorded with him, who's the second leading scorer on this team behind Cade Cunningham? And there's really no answer. I think with Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris, you at least have guys that could do that for a week stretch, for a couple nights. But also, you know what they don't do? They're not so good that if J.I. ends up being ready to be that guy, or if you want to say Asar or Ron or whoever, they don't like smash those guys down. And so, yeah, like overall, they have done with these two things what people have asked for. And yeah, I'm fine with it. All I was saying with the Grimes thing is I like the idea of what Grimes could be. That's, with the 3 and D and a younger player. But I understand people who just say like, hey, the injuries, maybe he didn't want to be here. You brought up a great point with them having to offer him an extension sooner rather than later.
No doubt. I'm looking at some numbers here. So of Detroit's returning players, Cade and Jaden Ivey led the team in attempts and makes last season. Ivey was 269 attempts, 124 makes. Cade, 119 three-pointers made, 335 attempts. Tim Hardaway Jr. last season got up 597 three-pointers.
Yep.
Like, he is a volume shooter to a completely different
level.
Like, just a whole different level of volume shooter than these guys. You can look at the percentage, but a guy taking that many threes is going to attract a lot of attention, and he can heat up. He is a volume shooter, and this team needed one.
Yeah, Cubicle Lake 7, essentially is saying the same stuff. 207 made threes, 85 more than our leading three-point shooter. Yeah, I got you, man. I got you. I'm going to read it here. 80 plus more than Grimes in his best year. I think the important thing here is THJ has gravity. And yeah, Michael says he has no conscience as a shooter. 100%. If you read my notes, so if you guys want, over on my Substack, I have my raw notes breakdowns. I watch all sorts of games throughout the year, and I keep notes multiple times. THJ has the ultimate green light. THJ misses 3 shots, and then he comes right back and he takes 3 more. And I will say for Tobias, I actually had a lot of notes about him making impactful plays late in games. So think about how much the Pistons struggled late in games, fourth quarters, coming up with a big offensive rebound or defensive rebound. I think that might be something Tobias Harris can bring that, hey, maybe that helps you win a few games here and there more than you would have otherwise. So in a vacuum, I think that they have brought in what you need to bring in just in terms of scoring gravity and floor spacing gravity. We can quibble with all of the other stuff, the defense. I think what's interesting is you're relying on the vets to space the floor, and then you're going to rely on the young guys to defend, right? You're going to ask Ron to be a really good defender. You're going to ask Asar to be a really good defender. We'll talk about who protects the rim here in just a second. But yeah, I think THJ with the volume is insane. The volume is insane. It's something that this team needs with that gravity.
Yeah, I mean, you really can't take that for granted. And this team still does have holes, and I think that's some of the frustration too, is that, like, who's going to defend on this team? They still need protection. They still need this and that. Like, I get all that. But bottom line for me is that Tobias and THJ do feel very, very needed roles. And I think Cade is going to appreciate having 2 guys next to him who can really, really shoot and take pressure off of him. But obviously, they do have other holes to fill too. And they still have $26 million in cap space remaining. So this summer is, it's still far from over. Like, I don't think they got bogey until like training camp almost opened a couple of years ago. So stuff can happen like right down to the wire. So I do expect they'll continue to make moves and adjust as they go into next season.
Yeah, and so El Blas, I hope we can ask Cade to be a defender this year as well. Like, this is a good point where if THJ is taking some volume, if Tobias is taking some volume, then ideally Cade is able to then take more of a onus on the defensive end, have more energy on that end of the floor. If you have some real scorers on offense, and he doesn't have to take as much of that load. We have a ton of questions, so we're going to go to short break. When we come back, we'll try to get to those.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we do have a lot of questions here. First, we're going to lead off with Kyle Metz. Bryce, can you come to Virginia to mow my lawn? You don't want me doing it. You want Bryce doing it for sure.
Yeah, no, I am going to take care of my own lawn. I enjoy that. I did this for a lot of years. I worked for a landscape company whenever I was in high school. I did it after I graduated college. I'm good mowing other people's lawns. I'll stick to mine. I appreciate the offer, Kyle, but that's a long flight to just come out there and do that. So.
All right, let's get a basketball question up from Alec Straw. What are our biggest holes still? I'd say backup point guards that can shoot threes and a rim protecting center. I think we both agree on a rim protecting center. How much do you think this team needs to address the point guard spot where you probably could have a veteran point guard back there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a yes, 100% yes. I do think that that's something this team could use. I've said before that Monte Morris was a guy that I thought was a really good signing. Like, that was a player I thought made a ton of sense last year because he did two things: make threes and not turn it over. It just didn't come to fruition in Detroit. So I don't think having that vet point guard would be a bad idea at all. And so
Tyus Jones would be fantastic on this team.
Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Tyus actually, so the year after JB left, Tyus was a backup point guard for John Morant. So I covered Tyus that season. He's like the perfect backup point guard. Like, he does everything you want. So he's still out there. So I guess we'll see.
So I'm trying to look up something on Spot Track. So go ahead and get us started on the next one, Omari.
All right. We will move on to this question from Bobby Buckets. Would love to get Wendell Carter Jr. There's been a lot of Wendell Carter Jr. in this chat, which I'm sure some of that is just the fact that Orlando brought everybody back. They even brought back Bataz Day, even though they already had Def at center. And they just brought back Mo Wagner too. I like him. Like, I don't know if Orlando's at a spot where they're looking to trade, but if you're just looking at a power forward who feels a need, I think he absolutely fits the bill. I just don't know from Detroit's end what you would give up to get him.
Yeah, like, I don't know what it would take to get him either, but Orlando just had an interesting offseason where they brought back Batadze and they brought back Mo Wagner. Like, they brought all of these dudes back to their roster when I thought maybe they would let one of them go. Like, they gave Batadze a real contract and they could barely get him off the bench last year. I think there's been these conversations anyway. I don't know why they want to move on from Wendell Carter Jr., but if he was actually on the trade market, I don't know what it would take to get him, but that's the type of floor spacer that could make a lot of sense for the Pistons. And so, yeah, like, I would be cool with this if they were able to make the move, depending always, the context is always, what does it take to actually get them?
No doubt. But yeah, if you're just talking like theoretical players who fit that hole for the Pistons, then yeah, I would say he's certainly pretty high up there. A question from Brennan: what we thinking about Tyus Jones or Gary Trent Jr.? I just talked about Tyus. Gary Trent is interesting to me. Like, it seemed like his market would have been higher than it was, just given his track record for success. But honestly, he's another guy that can really, really shoot the ball and would fit this team. I'm just not sure. Like, now that you have Tim Hardaway Jr., can you support him and Gary Trent? But you also have Ivy and these other guys. That's my question.
Yeah, that was my thought as well. I mean, yes, we will say you can never have enough floor spacing, but eventually you do have to be able to still have room for the young guys to play if you're going to keep all of them on the roster. And now you're starting to get how many guys that you have that just space the floor, but maybe are not great on the defensive end. I would guess that with Tim Hardaway Jr., you probably feel like you kind of have the role that Gary Trent Jr. is already. Like, how do you get those guys minutes and shots and still not suppress what Jaden Ivey is able to do and letting him grow and get his shots up as well? So that's the one thing I think I would like to be careful of now is you have Tim Hardaway Jr. in there. You have Tobias Harris in there. We've talked about what they bring to the table, how that's good stuff. Now you got to be careful about taking shots completely away from some of these other guys, because you still want J.I. to get shots. You still want Ron Holland to get shots. You want to give Asar at least a little bit of an offensive load, even if it is suppressed from what he had to do last year. So I like those guys. I like the idea of Gary Trent Jr. I just don't know that it makes as much sense now with Tim Hardaway.
No doubt. Cubicle Lake 7 says, could you stagger J.I. and Cade and not need a veteran point guard backup? Center is a bigger need. Agree that center is a bigger need. I feel like we're good, like the stagger discussion has been around so long, we still don't have a clear answer for it. A lot of that to me just comes down to where J.I. is as a playmaker. He's going to have to earn JB's trust as a playmaker. And I think some of the turnovers and passes he throws can just really irk coaches. And that's, I think that's kind of factored into some of the minutes over the years. But I would be curious to see that, though, right? If you could just put that faith into J.I. and he could take over that role. What do you think, Bryce?
Yeah, I would love to see them stagger. I've been yelling about this ever since they drafted J.I. I've even warmed up more to, like, if you want to, like, I don't care how it starts, whatever. You let J.I. run the bench mob, however you want to say it, whether he starts and staggers out or whatever. I do think with J.I., you want some sort of ball handler next to him. It doesn't have to necessarily be a true point guard. So I don't have a name off the top of my head, but somebody else that can take some of those duties, calm things down maybe when J.I. is starting to get sped up. Here's my thing with the center, Omari. Let's say you bring in a center, right? Whoever it is, insert name. What happens to Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart? Because to me, Jalen Duren is only playing the 5. And I've said I think we've learned that Isaiah Stewart needs to play most of his minutes at the 5. You just fix some of the 4 position with Tobias Harris, at least short term. Asar has to play the 4 at least some because of his lack of floor spacing and shooting. Probably be nice to play Fontecchio there a little bit. Like, how many minutes do you need for Stu at the 4? So bringing in a 5-man, are you trading one of those guys? Are you just letting... Are you moving Stu back to the 4 exclusively? That's my only thing there. I agree with everybody that this team needs more rim protection. I just don't think it's as simple as saying, hey, go sign this guy to protect the rim or go trade for this guy to protect the rim. And then the minutes kind of flesh out. So that's my thing with the centers. I wonder what it would mean for the rest of the roster.
And I'm very curious to see how this new regime sees Stu as a player. Like, he could play power forward with certain matchups.
Yes,
Thank you,
yes,
Clark. I appreciate
good call.
Like, I think there's certain matchups where you're going to want him at the 4 next to a guy like Duren. And I would say overall, Detroit's best case scenario long term is for Duren just to develop into that guy and not force these questions to be asked until he gets there. But I think ideally, you do see Isaiah as somebody that can probably fill in at that 5 spot. Like, he gives you some shooting at the 5. He can rebound. He's a solid paint protector. And he may be the solution, at least from a backup standpoint, if you want to stick to continuing to develop Duren, which at this point, unless there's a trade somewhere lurking, you're going to go into next season with Duren probably as your starting center. So I'm curious to see that for sure. I think we've had Isaiah Stewart's entire career under the previous regime, which had a very specific plan for him. And he met what they wanted. Like, he's developed his shot. He's done this and that. Still probably a better fit at the 5. So to me, I'm curious if their lack of going out of getting a center so far just indicates, hey, we already have a pretty good backup guy who can defend. So that's not as big of a priority.
So Michael says Duren probably is a 28 per minute guy. So I don't see how you don't add a reserve big who could play. I agree with that. Like, that's fair. I don't necessarily want that person to be over Isaiah Stewart, though. I would want that person to be, okay, Duren plays 28 at the 5. Stu plays 20 minutes at the 5. Maybe he gets a few minutes at the 4, but not a guy that's just like going to supplant. I think Isaiah Stewart's getting close to being the role that he can be successful in right now. And I don't want to see that change, I guess. And YouTube user, I'll get to the Don Barlow thing. You're in the queue here. We will get to that whenever you mentioned it earlier. I want to go ahead and talk about this quick. Big Dog Piston says Trajan has been straightforward in vision, plan, and execution. How do you feel like that, Omari, in terms of what you heard at the presser? We've seen him with the contract, with the contract that takes on future assets and Tim Hardaway Jr. And I don't know, they still have $26.5 million. I guess we'll see whether it's another trade or they actually spend it on a free agent.
Yeah, I feel like it's so tough to judge right now. Like, they still have $26 billion to spend. I think Tobias makes sense. I think THJ makes sense just as far as filling needs. It's just tough. I think it's really tough to get a feel for a GM until you really get a couple years in, to be honest. I think he's communicated what he wants to do very clearly, which I know fans appreciate, as far as him just coming out and saying, hey, we're going to, bring in bad contracts for assets. Like, you're going to slow play some of this, right? Like, we need draft picks. He's been very transparent about that, which is a good sign probably for fans who believe that that's the right way to go, especially I think with some frustration with the last regime where they probably didn't value draft capital to the extent that other teams have. Well, I mean, they did. I mean, like I said, they did not when you have teams like OKC that's got like 30 picks, but that's besides the point. I think he said the right things. I think the plan he's lined out makes sense where the Pistons are. And like I said, I think both signings Tobias' signing and then the trade for THJ makes sense as far as addressing needs, but I need more time. I know that's a cop-out. This is hard for me to judge off of like 4 or 5 weeks. Like, you really have to see, at least let's get to the end of the summer and see what he does with the rest of the cap.
So Brandon S says, one thing a lot of Pistons fans want is to move on from Duren. Given that JB uses a lot of help defense, that should help Duren a lot, right? A lot of guys in the paint last year making things hard. I'm assuming we're talking about defense here and the help side defenders being more in the like, sure, like that would insulate Duren on the defensive end. I think they have some of those athletes in terms of Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, those type of things. Duren just has to get better. Like at the end of the day, he just has to get better. To your point, though, he is still very young. It would be scary to sell on a guy that young in the same way. Like somehow some of my Jaden Ivey comments have gotten flipped. I don't think there's a bigger Jaden Ivey fan than me. And so like I would hate to see them sell on those guys. And to me, some of the moves that have been made thus far, Omari, actually makes me think that they aren't going to move. Like this is how things are going to move forward. You have the young guys. You have better pieces around them with Tobias and Tim Hardaway Jr., and you're going to be able to evaluate them better, hopefully, moving forward with how this roster is starting to shake out.
Yeah, I think anything you can do to just get support around the young guys helps, right? Like, I think all the guys are overmatched last season. And people point out, when people criticize JD's defense, the defense to his like a defense is, well, Detroit's guards didn't help, keep people out the lane, and he was overtaxed. Like, anything you could do, whether it's help defense or whatever, to help him do his job, I think will help a lot from a developmental standpoint, no doubt. Like, I don't know if it's going to be transformative, but it definitely helps.
So we had a question, are they going to re-sign Simone Fontecchio? Yes, this is an order of operations thing, guys. The nice thing with Simone, even though he got the bigger cap hold, that cap hold was not enough. It was not substantial enough. They have that cap hold. Simone Fontecchio is not going anywhere else. And then after all of this other stuff happens, they will sign him to his deal when they've already spent their other money. So this is just an order of operations thing, is my understanding, Omari, unless you have a different feel on it.
Order of operations, restricted free agent means that you don't need cap space to re-sign them. So you spend your cap, and then you can agree to a deal, but you don't actually have them sign it until your cap space is used up. So that way you're not eating into your own cap. So like Bryce said, it's order of operations.
YouTube's Uber said, Don Barlow, Sam is a big fan. I love him as a third big and try to develop him. Yeah, that's the name. That's the type of name I think you could bring in. He's your third center. If he would take that role, of course, maybe he's looking for a better role. Maybe that's why he's not still in San Antonio. But you bring him in, you put him in that role. He has some interesting skills. I would love that. I would absolutely love that. If they signed Don Barlow, that would be great. That's the type of center acquisition that makes sense to me. Duren and Stu aren't going to play 82 games both, so then there's going to be some nights where he gets even more minutes. And just to piggyback off of that, somebody had brought up James Wiseman. James Wiseman signed today on a 2-year deal with the Indiana Pacers. So James Wiseman is off the Detroit Pistons and with the Indiana Pacers, which I think is an interesting fit considering the style of play they have.
We have a question here from Brian Wright. What would it take for us to get Walker Kessler? Probably draft capital, if I had to guess. I don't think Utah. I know that there's been some reporting that Utah's open to parting ways with him, but just looking at where they're at in their rebuild, like, they don't need to part ways with Walker Kessler or anything. I would have to think it would have to be worth their while. And if you look at what Detroit could offer, I don't know if there's a match there. I don't, unless they're just super low on them and they're just like, yeah, we'll take 3 second-round picks. So I'd be curious about that. But obviously, he's a guy that can really lift the defensive floor for this team. What do you think of Walker Kessler, Bryce?
No, I think the defense speaks for itself. He was a elite shot blocker in college. My question would be, why does Utah want to move on from Walker Kessler?
Yeah, like after 2 years, yeah.
It's the same thing. People are, in the chat get very upset anytime Jalen Duren being traded gets bring up. I'm sure, the same thing around the league is people, why would Pistons fans want to trade Jalen Duren? As somebody that doesn't watch 82 games of the Utah Jazz, I wonder, why do they want to move on from Walker Kessler? And I would just like to know the answer, because there isn't an immediate person on the roster that says, oh, this is why. Like, even their draft picks, Cody Williams is a wing, Isaiah Collier is a guard, a point guard. Kyle Filipowski fell to the second round for a reason and isn't really the same type of, he isn't at all the same type of player as Walker Kessler. Kyle Filipowski is an offensive-minded dribble pass shoot big, not a defensive big like Kessler. So I would want that answer. Maybe somebody could tell me that. Also, like, do you really want to do a deal with Danny Ainge? Is that something we want to get involved with? Because it seems like he wins those a lot. So Big Cheese says, is Holland more developed than Kuminga when drafted? I will be completely transparent here. I wasn't doing NBA draft stuff when Kuminga came into the league. I don't want to answer a question that I don't feel like I can confidently answer. So I appreciate the question. I don't know that I have a fair answer for you, though.
Yeah, I would say I think it's tough to measure development in like a, sort of like that type of binary way because guys have strengths and weaknesses in different areas. But I will say, and the reason why I lost my train of thought to the Jalen Duren help defense question earlier is because I was fighting the internet trying to find Kuminga's G League stats, and I forgot that was a little bit of a weird season coming out of the pandemic. But I'll say the main area that Holland is clearly ahead of Kuminga in coming out is just overall percentage, right? Where neither of those guys really shot the ball that well, but Kuminga did not crack 40% overall shooting in the G League. And Holland, even though he didn't shoot the ball very well, like his overall efficiency was still pretty solid, right? Like I'm looking at his numbers from last season now. I want to say he was like 46, 47%. Yeah, he was 47% from the field last season. So whether that implies he's a more polished scorer or what, I'm not sure. But I do think he can make plays with the ball. I do think he can get downhill. He drew more fouls than Kuminga. There's a little bit more there. Like, I don't think he's as much of a project as Kuminga, where that was like a pure upside swing. I think Ron Holland has a little bit more NBA skill coming out.
Yeah, that was an interesting draft because it kind of was a 5-person draft there for a while. Then, Jalen Suggs sneaks in, Josh Giddey sneaks in, Kuminga fell to 7. Yeah, I'll be honest. I spent a lot of my time that year on K, Jalen Green, and Evan Mobley. So I like I say, I've learned very early in this to stay in my lane and not try to talk about stuff that I didn't know about. And so again, I appreciate the question. I just wasn't as deep into the draft then as what I am now. From Brody Knight, honestly never listened to this before, just came over because of game theory, and I wanted to shout out Aaron Estrada. Roll Tide, baby. My guy is a bucket. So appreciate you, Brody, for tuning in. We'll see what Aaron Estrada has at Summer League. Question here, your favorite bad contracts to absorb can still play and gain an asset to take on. I've tried to find these, and I have not been super successful. Do you have it? I think you did an article, or are those names kind of off the board? DeAndre Hunter, I feel like, is a name that people, I just feel like I walked the fine line of teams that would actually sell these guys for nothing. Like, is Portland going to attach an asset to Jeremy? I think when I was talking the other day, what happened was a lot of the bad contracts I came up with were multiple years. So the Jeremy Grant, the Andrew Wiggins, the Zach LaVine, and I just don't have as much of an appetite for those as even a Tim Hardaway Jr., just a 1-year deal where you're getting off of it right away. And, like you say, so the point with Tobias Harris, it's still only 2 years, even if they didn't get the team option that I was hoping they would.
Yeah. So looking back on my story, the first name I actually put there was Tim Hardaway Jr., just because I thought that was the most likely and easy to execute, which obviously happened. Beyond that, I mean, I think the two guys you look at, are Andrew Wiggins and Zach LaVine. Like, I don't know if I would call them my favorite bad contracts to absorb, but I think those are guys who clearly the teams that are on would gain something from giving up an asset to get off of that deal for one reason or another. Obviously with both guys, there's huge risk, right? LaVine's got 3-4 years left on this deal. A lot of money owed. Wiggins has kind of been in and out of the lineup dealing with personal stuff. So where do you fall as far as that? How much do you get out of those guys going forward? But I think that's what you look at a bit, because there are not as many truly bad contracts, I think, in today's NBA as there were maybe like 10 years ago, where you saw guys like Luol Deng, like you had vets who you could not live up to what they're being paid at all. You don't see it as much now because even Zach LaVine can still really play basketball. He's not washed. He's just injured. So those are the names I'll look at. Beyond that, I don't know how many teams are looking to really salary dump unless all of a sudden they have to clear salary to acquire some type of player, which is a little bit tougher to project. But those are the names I think of when I think salary dump at this point.
YouTube user said, Wes, can you fix all of his typos in his questions? He gives you a thumb down. He does not know how to do that. We are not technically advanced enough for that, but we appreciate it nonetheless. Some names that the chat brought up, Robert Williams would just be a bet on injury type stuff. Capella, again, I like the idea of Capella. I wonder where that goes with the roster, though, in terms of if you bring in Capella, you're going to play him. He does some nice things. Where do the minutes go for Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart? How do those hash out? Is CJ a bad contract that New Orleans would give away so they can sign BI? I literally text this to Wes. I said, what about CJ McCollum? I like the idea of that. Now, here's the thing with CJ is He's not going to help you at all defensively. Like, that's not doing it defensively. And does that become too much of an overlap again with Tim Hardaway Jr.? So that would be interesting. Ejecto Cito says, I believe Wiggins slots in the remaining space perfectly. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously that's a name that's been talked about. Bryce and Omari, who are your biggest sleepers on the free agent list? So I have that pulled up. You know, if you wanted another floor spacer, Buddy Hield's still out there. We talked Gary Trent Jr., Malik Beasley, Luke Kennard. Any names for you? Monty Morris is still out there if they wanted to revisit that. Caleb Martin, Sadiq Bey. Sadiq Bey is a free agent.
Yeah. No, they have some guys out there. Luke Kennard, I think, obviously feels a huge need. Former Piston. Like, I know you guys know him. I mentioned Tyus Jones, but again, if you're talking about somebody who actually really does feel a current need right now, like Tyus Jones is right in there. Buddy Hield, yeah, I mean, if you can get, one of the best shooters over the last, 8 years on your team, I don't know what else he does besides shoot, but that's still probably pretty useful to have, right? There's still some good names out there. Like, those are all pretty solid rotation guys, like nothing that's going to be transformative, but I have some names here, like Markelle Fultz. Like, I think he'll be solid as a backup point guard. Yeah, Malik Beasley, that's a name there. You still have Alec Burks out there, but you have some guys I think who would fit really, really well. So
apparently, while we're recording here in the middle, that Monte Morris actually signed a deal with the Phoenix Suns.
Yeah.
So yeah, Monte Morris is not an option anymore there. So that deal got done. That's a nice deal for Phoenix with that. So yeah, I think those are. Dario Saric is a name that I think people bring up quite a bit just because of the floor spacing from a bigger player. So I would understand that as well. All right. I think we're gonna cut it there. We appreciate you guys so much for tuning in. The chat was really good. Again, always appreciate when you guys keep it respectful and all of that. You got really good questions, really good engagement. Even if you agree or disagree with us, whatever, it's cool. We appreciate it that you guys were there. Hit the like button, share it, tell a friend about it, any of that type of stuff. If you're listening on podcasts here, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the rest of the week, please, rate, review, subscribe, all of those things. We really appreciate it. Just continue to help us grow. We will be back, enjoy the holidays, and then we'll be back Sunday or Monday, something like that. Probably depends on the news cycle a little bit, but kind of get back into a regular schedule. And then, not that episode, but the episode after that, Omari, we will go live from Las Vegas. I believe we're planning on Sunday morning because the Pistons, Omari, Saturday night is their first game. Am I not right?
Yeah, because I'm only going to be there for 3 days, so that's the only game I'm going to watch live. But, oh well, we'll still have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so Saturday night, here's the thing. We're not going to go right after the game on Saturday night, guys, because it gets really hard to get away from the arena. We try to go out and eat and stuff like that. So
especially with the construction that's been going on, it takes an hour to get, like a mile and a half sometimes. It's insane.
Yeah, we ended up walking to get to the episode in time last time. So one final thing I will say on that. So we'll record Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, sometime coming up next week. The week after that, we'll be live Sunday morning after the Pistons play their first Summer League game Saturday night. Guys, if you see us out there, I don't know that you'll find two more approachable people in the content space, Pistons or otherwise. Say what's up, say hello, come talk to us about the Pistons. Respectfully, of course. Even if you disagree, we can handle it, but respectfully. But thank you guys so much.
Bryce is 6'6", so he'll stand out more than me.
And bald. Yeah. I'll probably shave my head right before we go out, so it'll be very shiny in the arena. Like, I'll stand out like a sore thumb. You'll be able to find us. So Chuck Brewer says, so eating is more important than basketball talk. Yeah, I mean,
it will be. Even
if you guys don't agree with my food takes, it's still, I love food. I love to eat it. So D Brown, excellent content. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah,
Wes, man, you're the man. Appreciate you as always. Omari, take it away, my guy.
No, absolutely. Big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chan, our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols, and big shout out to Wes, as always. And we're excited to talk to you all next week.